the static or the dynamic activity that we undergo. So these much of informations or complications that tends to get involved within simple foot wear. That is, we need to consider static and dynamic loading. We need to consider the surface area of contact. We need to make sure the irregular wear rate is balanced. And finally, as we have seen, there is a highest amount of or highest need of customization which need to be undergone in terms of footwear. So these are the four major parameters which we considered when it came to design of this particular footwear. Like people might have a question, fine, my grandfathers or great grandfathers, they didn't bother about anything to do with footwear. And why is that we are suddenly looking into these parameters? But if you look at it, during the early days, they all were into farming or they walked in barefoot. And when they walked in barefoot, they walked on surfaces like this, a mud or flexible surface underneath their foot. So when they walked on these sort of flexible surfaces, what happened was the surface was taking the entire load. That means that the surface deformed according to the foot shape. Whereas now we walk on hard surfaces, our surface doesn't deform according to the profile of the foot. Whereas in the early days, the surface tend to deform according to the type of foot, and that changed um, some major parameters which we'll see. So the one thing to take it up is if you are walking on flexible surfaces, the particular surface tend to take the entire loading of the human body. Whereas when we work on hard surfaces, barefoot, that doesn't take the load. It only takes the load on certain areas, wherein the arch region, the metatarsal and the metatarsal region and the phalanges region. So these are the three regions it tends to take the load, while the other regions the load doesn't get taken up. And speaking of gauge cycle, as I mentioned, what a gauge cycle is, when we are standing, the entire weight is transferred to the ground, whereas when we are in mobility, 60% of the time only our foot strikes the ground, whereas the 40% of the time our foot is in swing phase or foot is in air. So that means that the 40% of the time there is no loading. Only 60% of the time we tend to our foot tends to get loaded on the ground. And looking at the types of foot, so these are the various types of foot. And what we tend to do is, in this particular work, we wanted to know the static and dynamic loading. And because that is the one important parameter which defines the amount of load that is taken by the foot. So in order to understand the static and dynamic loading, we started measuring the pressure points under the foot. So how we measured those pressure pointers, we used one of the device which is used by orthopedicians. What they use in order to understand the gait cycle after a hip surgery, we use the same device, which is a pressure platform. We took the pressure platform and we made the patients, the diabetic patients, to walk over the pressure platform. And as the diabetic patients walk over the pressure platform, we tend to capture the pressure distribution data. So we tend to collect the data of the diabetic patient. And after collecting the data of the diabetic patient, we tend to make them to walk over the platform. We take the static and dynamic loading. In terms of static loading, we make them to stand on this, we capture the data. When it comes to dynamic loading, we ask them to walk over it and we capture the dynamic data. So capturing these two data, so this is what you are finding here, the data which is captured. Um, Both the static and dynamic data combined together. Like here I have shown two samples. One is the high arch foot and one is the normal arch foot. Here in terms of normal arch, you would see the pink ones or the peak pressure lines, whereas the red ones are the second level of pressure points, pressure exertions over the foot. the yellow one, the third level, and green, blue, and black. That's how it goes on. And there are some areas where there is no contact at all. And if we look at the pressure data, and just zoom for the pressure data, you can see that there are some regions where the highest peak pressure was 545 kilopascals, and there are some regions of the foot wherein it took about only 10 kilopascals. So there is a major difference which is happening here. Some areas where the peak pressures are mounting to 545, 580, and some areas where the peak pressures are, I mean, the pressures are around 10 kilopascals. So when this person becomes diabetic, the first portion that it gets taken off would be this front toe, because the high pressure points are lying in this region. So understanding this, we our focus was to find an alternative way in order to remove this peak pressure. So in order to do that, what we did is we understand the peak pressure zones, and the idea of what we adopted is simple one, wherein wherever there is high pressure, we need to offload the high pressures, and wherever there is low pressure, we need to unload those regions. And the easiest way to offload the high pressure zones is if we make it flexible over there, automatically the pressure gets distributed over there. And wherever there is no pressure at all, we need to unload it over there. And I mentioned that when we were speaking of Conex, we saw a situation we can manufacture rubber-like products, and along with making rubber-like products, we can also change the elasticity levels. That is, some regions we can have it as show hardness of 40, some regions we can have it as 50, 60, 70, 80. We can keep changing the show hardness. So what we did is, for when it comes to designing our footwear, we tend to capture the data, and based on the pressure points, we completely custom design the footwear. So we split the entire foot insole. It's not of one single material. It will has multiple materials with varied levels of elasticity. So from place to place, the elasticity level changes, and that defines that it will start taking different loads at different places. Now that we are bringing out the elasticity variation, and thereby the load tends to get distributed. So this product we printed in a Connex machine, and this is the finally printed part. This is the data which shows before and after. You could see from the data, like we splitted the foot into 6 different zones, and there are some zones where the peak pressure, when a person walked on barefoot, he was having 70 kilopascals, and the moment he wore a custom insole, the peak pressure got dropped down, and it is about 49 kilopascals over here. And there are some regions where there was no load at all, and this got loaded once after wearing the custom insole. Say for example, the arch region of our foot, it was not loaded, and now this got loaded mm, after wearing a custom insole. We didn't stop with the scientific method. We also went through acupuncture method as well to just cross check how it is going to create an impact on diabetes patients. So from acupuncture point of view, these are the pressure points, and we could see that these pressure points, the pancreas nerve endings comes and ends at the arch region. And we all know that pancreas are the ones which play a major role in terms of endocrine function, and that is the one which regulates the blood sugar levels. And with our regular footwear, the pancreas never gets activated, and that is why the diabetic patients tend to be more prone towards it. Whereas the moment we go for these custom insoles, the entire surface of area of the foot gets loaded, and this region also gets loaded. And our claim is it won't reduce the diabetes level, but it would prolong the time of any foot issues. Say, for example, if a diabetic patient is going to face any foot issue in 2 years, wearing these custom insoles, it would prolong his time to from 2 to 5 years, So that is, it tends to buy the time for the diabetic patients, but it won't reduce the diabetes levels, because that is related to endocrine function. But all it does is it buys time, and it provides more comfort, and it reduces the foot ulceration um, for the diabetic patients. This is the comparison of pressure data. Before, you could see that it was quite erratic, whereas after wearing a custom insole, it is within a certain limit, and the peak pressure distribution is different over here as compared to the previous scenario. And here are the results of normal foot before and after. We could see that earlier the surface area of contact of a normal foot is 135 square centimeters, whereas after wearing a custom insole, the surface area of contact improved by 15% roughly, and which is 157.5 centimeters square. And comparing the data, zone wise, we could see some areas where the peak pressures are, it got reduced drastically, and some areas where there was no pressure at all, it got increased. So there is a distribution of pressure both for the static and dynamic condition, and that means that the entire pressure distribution have got varied, and this is along with improving the surface area of contact. This is the patient whose data is shared, and you can see that earlier he had peak pressure in the heel region, whereas after wearing a custom insole, we could see the pressure got distributed evenly, and the surface area of the foot is a normal arch. And after wearing custom insole, it looks like as if he's a flat foot person, because the surface area got improved. And as the surface area got improved and the load distribution started changing, you could see some areas where earlier where there were more amount of pressure, it got redistributed to the entire surface, and it have reduced the pressure distribution in total. So this is the data comparison for both left and right insole. And end of the day, speaking of the results, as the footwear is split into zones, you could see from zone to zone. In zone 2, around 6% it got reduced, and zone 3, 27%, and zone 4, it's about 24%. And in total, roughly about on average, we can say that around 20% the entire pressure got distributed. And in terms of surface area, the surface area got improved by 15%. And in the same manner, I have shown you for a normal arch. In the same manner, this is a normal arch. In the same manner, we also did for a high arch person, that is a person who has high arch, and wherein his peak pressure distribution is only in the heel and the metatarsal region, while the mid-foot region is not at all loaded. Whereas in normal foot, at least this mid-foot would be loaded to some extent, whereas in high arch, it wouldn't be loaded to that extent. So here you could find for a normal arch person a different profile of the footwear. And when we were designing this footwear, we took into consideration the how to relieve of the sweat and how to improve the friction between the foot and the insole. All those parameters were taken into consideration, and the footwear is being made. And this is the statistical data for a high arch foot, wherein the surface area of contact was improved by 15%, um, which was more way higher than the normal arch foot. And undergoing this work, we went through a patent on this, two international patents and two Indian patents on this particular project. So the takeaway that I would give you through this particular work, which we focused specifically for our Indian population, as we brought in an idea of designing custom footwear, which is specifically focused for our Indian population, or for the and one takeaway that I would give as an end of this particular work is, like when we went through this research work, we realized that not only diabetic patients, every one of us need to be very much aware of our foot, and we need to give more importance to our foot, as or else the importance that we give to the face, it need to be given to the foot. And it's because like, all the necessary body glands or the nerve endings ends at the foot, and it need to be activated at a proper rate, because that would reduce more amount of infections or disease. And so whenever you're selecting your footwear, be aware of your foot type, and based on the foot type, you can choose your shoes or your slippers. Any mismatch in that, it would start leading to issues like your foot or ankle issues. When we are healthy, it doesn't matter much, but during old age, it tends to matter a lot. So with that note, I would wind off with this particular session, and I'd like to thank you for your time. I'm pretty much open for questions. I'll leave you with a small thought, and thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Participants, if you are having any queries, you can switch on the mic and you can interact.
Sir, good morning, sir. Your session is so nice, sir. So beautiful. Thank you, sir. Thanks for your. I have received so many information from you. Anyway, thanks for your session, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Muruganandam sir, one more participants. Mr. Tirkan sir want to talk something.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Any queries from any participants?
Sir, he is trying, but he is unable to talk, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
I think it's data speed or something might be an issue, sir. Okay, sir. If there is any question, like, please do email me. I'm pretty much going to answer at any time.
Sure, sir.
Sure.
Sure, sir.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So thank you for your contribution towards our AICT sponsored STTP, sir. And you have delivered the two wonderful sessions, and you have shared most of your research experiences. It's very informative for us, and hope you can. On behalf of our institution, I wish you to do more societal based projects and research in the field of 3D printing, and you get succeeded more and more. And I wish you, sir. So thank you, sir, and hope this phase of this entire STTP is going to organize in another 3 phases. Hope you can deliver the sessions in the upcoming phases too, sir. So thank you. So thank you once again, sir.
Sure, sir. Thank you. And thanks for your time, sir. Thank you. And thank
participants, right now? Yes, sir. Okay. So participants, right now, the day 5 morning